I arrived at the small coastal town of Byton just before dusk, and the air carried the scent of salt and brine. The town seemed peaceful, almost serene, but there was something about the way the wind whispered through the narrow streets that made me uneasy. The sea, just a few miles away, beckoned silently, its vastness stretching beyond the horizon. I had come to this town to escape the chaos of my daily life, but there was something about the ocean here that felt different. The locals were friendly enough, though they seemed hesitant whenever I mentioned the beach. They exchanged wary glances, and their smiles would falter just a little. One old man, hunched over with years of labor, muttered something under his breath when I told him I planned to camp by the shore. I didn't catch all of it, but I could have sworn he said, "The ocean isn't quiet for long." I brushed off his warning, chalking it up to local superstition. After all, every small town has its legends, right? But as I drove toward the beach, setting up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The wind howled, tugging at my tent, and the waves crashed harder than I expected. Still, I settled in, eager for a peaceful night under the stars. That first night was unsettling. The wind outside was relentless, and it seemed to carry more than just the sound of the ocean. Lying in my tent, I heard whispers. They were faint at first, blending in with the rustling of the wind, but soon they became clearer, almost like voices. I sat up, straining to listen, but every time I tried to catch what they were saying, they faded away. It felt like they were just out of reach, teasing me from the edge of my consciousness. I got up and unzipped the tent, stepping out onto the cool sand. The beach was empty as far as I could see. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the water. The waves seemed to shimmer, and I thought I saw movement beneath the surface, but it was probably just my imagination, stirred by the strange sounds. I shook my head, laughing at myself. There was no one here but me, the sea, and the wind. Yet as I turned to go back into the tent, the whispers came again, this time more distinct. I froze, my skin crawling. It wasn't just the wind. The voices were calling my name. The whispers continued through the night, ebbing and flowing with the rhythm of the waves. I tried to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tossed and turned, clutching my blanket as if it could protect me from whatever lurked outside. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. My dreams were filled with images of the ocean, its waters darker than I had ever seen before. In the distance, I saw figures moving beneath the surface, their eyes glowing faintly. They were calling to me, urging me to join them beneath the waves. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The whispers had stopped, but the unease lingered. I couldn't explain what had happened, and a part of me didn't want to. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I decided to head into town to clear my head. I couldn't shake the events of the previous night, and I needed to talk to someone, anyone, who could offer an explanation. I walked into the local diner where a few fishermen were gathered around a table talking in hushed tones. I sat at the counter ordering a cup of coffee and listened to their conversation. They were talking about the sea, about strange occurrences that had been happening recently. A boat had gone missing, they said, and people had been hearing things that shouldn't be possible. I leaned in, trying to catch more of their conversation. That's when the old man from the previous day sat next to me, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or regret. He looked at me, and before I could ask, he said, "You heard them, didn't you?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Heard what?" "The whispers," he replied, his voice low and raspy. "They've been calling out to people for centuries. Some say it's the spirits of the drowned, others say it's the mermaids, but I say it's worse than that." I stared at him, unsure if he was serious or just trying to scare me. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my skin. "The drowned city. It's real. And if they've started calling to you, you're already in danger." The old man's words weighed heavily on my mind as I walked out of the diner. The drowned city? It sounded like a myth, a story to scare tourists, but something about the way he spoke made it hard to dismiss. I needed to know more. I found myself at the town's small library, hoping to find any mention of the drowned city. After hours of searching, I stumbled upon an old book, its pages yellowed with age. The book spoke of a city that had once stood by the coast, a thriving community that had mysteriously disappeared beneath the waves centuries ago. According to the legend, the city's inhabitants had angered the gods, and their punishment was to live forever beneath the sea, unable to escape their watery prison. But there was more. The book mentioned something about the mermaids, creatures who lived in the depths, guarding the city and luring unsuspecting travelers to their doom. The whispers, the voices I had heard, were said to be the voices of the cursed souls, calling out for help or worse, looking for new victims to join them. I closed the book, my hands shaking. The whispers weren't just in my head, they were real, and if the legend was true, I was in more danger than I could have ever imagined. After leaving the library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something far bigger than a local legend. The book's words echoed in my mind as I walked back to the beach. It was still mid-afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, but the ocean looked different now. The waves were calm, too calm, and it felt like the water itself was watching me. I stood at the edge of the shore, staring out at the horizon. The wind was soft, the sand cool beneath my feet, but everything seemed off. It was as if the beach had shifted, like it was waiting for something, or someone. My heart raced, and despite the warmth of the sun, a chill ran down my spine. I stayed there for hours, mesmerized by the rhythmic rise and fall of the waves. Time slipped away, and before I knew it, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. The whispers returned. They were faint at first, just like the night before, but soon they grew louder, more distinct. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were calling me. A part of me wanted to run, to pack up and leave the town behind, but another part, deeper, more primal, urged me to stay. The ocean was drawing me in like a moth to a flame. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers grew louder with every passing hour, filling the night air with an eerie cadence that made my skin crawl. I stayed in my tent, curled up beneath my blanket, hoping that the sounds would fade, but they didn't. They only grew more intense. By midnight, the whispers had turned into a soft hum, like a lullaby. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. The beach was bathed in moonlight and the water glistened under its pale glow. The ocean seemed calm, almost inviting. But as I stared out at the waves, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, just beneath the surface, were shadows. They moved gracefully, gliding through the water like dancers in a slow, haunting waltz. At first I thought they were fish or maybe dolphins, but the longer I watched, the more I realized that these figures were human-like. Their forms were slender, their movements fluid and deliberate. I took a step closer to the water, my breath caught in my throat. The figures seemed to sense my presence, and for a brief moment they stopped. One of them turned toward me, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. My heart raced and I stumbled back, tripping over the soft sand. As quickly as they had appeared, the shadows disappeared beneath the waves, leaving the water calm and still once again. I stood there, my mind racing. What had I just seen? Mermaids? Spirits? Whatever they were, I knew one thing for certain. They were watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I spent the next few days in a haze, my mind consumed by the figures I had seen in the water. I tried to go about my day, exploring the town and talking to the locals, but I couldn't focus on anything else. The ocean had taken hold of me, and no matter how hard I tried to resist, I felt its pull growing stronger. I returned to the beach every evening, unable to stay away. Each night the whispers grew louder, and the shadows beneath the waves became more defined. I could see them clearly now, long, graceful bodies with pale skin that shimmered under the moonlight. Their faces were hauntingly beautiful, but there was something off about them, something unsettling. The more I watched, the more I felt like they were calling me, beckoning me to join them beneath the waves. It was as if they knew I was watching, and they wanted me to come closer. I tried to fight the urge, but every night I found myself standing at the water's edge, my toes sinking into the wet sand as the whispers filled my mind. By the fourth night, I couldn't resist any longer. I waded into the water, the cool waves lapping at my ankles. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and before I knew it, I was waist-deep in the ocean, the water pulling me in like an invisible force. The shadows beneath the waves danced around me, their movements graceful and hypnotic. For a moment I felt at peace, as if I belonged there. But then something changed. The water around me grew colder, and the whispers turned into harsh, guttural voices. The shadows moved closer, their glowing eyes locking onto mine. Panic set in, and I tried to pull away, but the water held me in place, dragging me deeper. Just as I thought I was about to be pulled under, the figures vanished, and the water released its grip on me. I stumbled back to the shore, gasping for breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and I collapsed onto the sand, trembling. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of those glowing eyes stayed with me. The next morning I returned to the diner, hoping to find the old man who had warned me about the drowned city. I needed answers, someone to explain what I had seen and what was happening to me. But when I asked around, no one seemed to know who I was talking about. I spent the day searching the town, asking anyone I could find about the old man. Some shrugged, others gave me strange looks, and a few told me I should leave while I still could. It was clear that the townspeople were hiding something, but I couldn't figure out what. That evening I found myself back at the beach. I knew I shouldn't go, that I should stay as far away from the water as possible, but the pull was too strong. The ocean had its claws in me now, and no matter how hard I tried to resist, I couldn't stay away. As I stood at the shore, watching the waves crash against the sand, I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away. She was older, with deep lines etched into her weathered face, and her eyes held a mixture of fear and pity. "They've chosen you," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The whispers, they only come for those they've marked." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you mean? Who are they?" She glanced at the ocean, her expression darkening. "The spirits of the drowned city. They want you to join them. If you keep coming back here, you will." Before I could ask her anything else, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The spirits of the drowned city had chosen me, and if I didn't leave soon, I'd be trapped forever. That night I couldn't sleep. The woman's warning echoed in my mind, mingling with the whispers that had started again outside my tent. They were louder now, more insistent, and I could feel them pulling me toward the water. I knew I should leave, but something inside me refused to listen. The ocean had become a part of me, and I couldn't walk away. The drowned city was real, and I needed to see it for myself. I needed to understand why the whispers had chosen me. Against my better judgment, I packed up my things and walked down to the beach. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the water. The waves seemed calmer tonight, almost inviting, and the whispers had turned into a soft hum, like a lullaby calling me home. I waded into the water, letting it wash over my legs. The pull was stronger now, tugging at me with invisible hands, but this time I didn't resist. I let it take me, sinking deeper and deeper into the ocean's embrace. As the water rose to my chest, I saw the shadows again, moving just beneath the surface. Their glowing eyes locked onto mine, and this time I didn't feel fear. I felt peace. The drowned city was waiting for me, and I was ready to see it. As I stood waist-deep in the ocean, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, as though the sea had finally accepted me as one of its own. The whispers swirled around me, no longer harsh and haunting, but melodic, like a distant song carried on the wind. I knew I shouldn't go any further, but something deep inside me urged me forward. I took another step, and the water rose to my chest. The sea was cool but not freezing, as though it was beckoning me to come deeper. The shadows moved beneath me, their glowing eyes watching my every move. I wasn't afraid anymore. Instead, I felt drawn to them, as though I had found my purpose. The figures seemed familiar, like I had known them my entire life. I closed my eyes and let the waves carry me, feeling the gentle tug of the current as it pulled me further out. My feet left the sandy bottom and I floated weightless, the ocean cradling me in its arms. The water was darker now, the light of the moon dimming as the horizon stretched out before me. Suddenly, I felt a hand grasp my ankle. My eyes snapped open and I gasped, flailing in the water. But there was no one there. The shadows beneath me had vanished, replaced by a deeper darkness that seemed to swirl like ink in the water. I kicked, trying to swim back to shore, but the hand held tight, pulling me down. I thrashed, my heart racing, but the pull was too strong. I sank beneath the surface, the water swallowing me whole as I was dragged down into the depths. The water around me was black, so thick and suffocating that I couldn't see more than an inch in front of my face. I tried to kick, to fight my way to the surface, but my body felt heavy, like I was sinking through quicksand. My lungs burned and I panicked, clawing at the water in a desperate attempt to break free. But the ocean held me tight, pulling me deeper and deeper into its abyss. My chest tightened, and I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, icy water rushed into my lungs, choking me as I sank further into the darkness. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the grip on my ankle loosened, and I stopped sinking. My feet touched something solid, and I realized with a jolt that I was standing on the ocean floor. I gasped, expecting to choke on more water, but to my shock, I could breathe. The water around me was thick, murky, but I could feel the cool air filling my lungs as though I was standing in the open air. The darkness began to fade, replaced by a faint glow that seemed to come from the water itself. I turned and my breath caught in my throat. There in the distance I could see the faint outline of buildings, ancient, crumbling, half buried in the sand. The drowned city. The ruins of the city stretched out before me, ghostly and decayed, as though it had been asleep under the ocean for centuries. Broken pillars jutted out from the sand, their tops covered in thick layers of seaweed. Shattered stone buildings loomed in the distance, their walls crumbling and worn by time. I took a step forward, my feet sinking into the soft sand of the ocean floor. The water around me felt heavy, pressing in on me from all sides, but I could still breathe, as though I had stepped into a different world. The whispers had grown silent, but the eerie feeling of being watched lingered in the air. As I moved deeper into the city, the shadows returned, gliding through the water like wraiths. They stayed just out of reach, their glowing eyes watching my every move. I couldn't tell if they were leading me somewhere or simply observing me, but their presence was unsettling. The deeper I went, the more the city revealed itself. Ancient statues, their faces worn smooth by the ocean's currents, lined the streets. Broken stone roads wound through the ruins, leading to a massive structure at the center of the city. It looked like a temple, its massive columns reaching up toward the surface, though it was half buried in the sand. I knew I should be terrified, but instead I felt a strange sense of peace. The city was haunting, but it was also beautiful in a way. It was as though I had stepped into a forgotten world, a place lost to time. But the further I ventured, the more I realized that I wasn't alone. As I approached the temple, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just the crumbling ruins of the city, shrouded in the dim glow of the water. I took another step, and then I saw them. Figures, standing in the shadows of the buildings, their eyes glowing faintly in the murky water. They were humanoid, but there was something off about them. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their hair floated around them like seaweed. Their eyes were wide and hollow, as though they were staring straight through me. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. They just stood there watching me. I froze, my heart racing. I wanted to run, to get as far away from the city as possible, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The figures continued to stare at me, their glowing eyes unblinking. Suddenly, one of them moved. It stepped forward, its body gliding through the water with an unnatural grace. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure tilted its head as though it was studying me, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in its eyes. Then, without warning, it vanished, dissolving into the water like smoke. I stood there, my body trembling, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. But before I could process it, the whispers returned. They were louder now, more urgent, and they were coming from the temple. I had no choice. I had to go inside. The entrance to the temple loomed before me, its massive stone doors half open, revealing a dark passageway beyond. The whispers were louder now, echoing from deep within the structure, beckoning me to enter. I hesitated, fear clawing at my chest. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to run as far away from this place as I could, but the pull was too strong. The city had claimed me, and I couldn't resist its call. I stepped through the doors, my feet sinking into the soft sand of the temple floor. The air, or rather the water, felt different here, heavier, more oppressive. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, depicting strange, otherworldly creatures that I couldn't quite make out. They seemed to shift and change as I moved, their forms flickering in the dim light. The passageway twisted and turned, leading deeper into the heart of the temple. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though I still couldn't make out the words. They seemed to echo off the walls, surrounding me, filling my mind with a strange, disorienting hum. As I reached the end of the passage, I entered a large, open chamber. The ceiling was high, covered in intricate carvings that depicted scenes of the city's past. At the center of the chamber was a massive stone altar, its surface smooth and polished, as though it had been untouched by time. I approached the altar, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were deafening now, filling my head with a strange, rhythmic chant. I reached out to touch the altar, my fingers brushing against the cool stone, and then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the temple. I wasn't even sure I was still underwater. The air was thick, almost suffocating, but it wasn't the cool, weightless sensation of the ocean. It felt dense and oppressive, like I had been buried alive. I sat up slowly, my head spinning, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The chamber around me was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the carvings on the walls. But something was different. The walls were shifting, moving as though they were alive. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The altar was still there, but it was no longer smooth and polished. It was cracked, its surface marred by deep grooves that seemed to pulse with an eerie blue light. The air around it shimmered, and I could feel a strange energy radiating from it. I backed away, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the altar. Something was happening. Something ancient and powerful was waking up, and I had the terrifying feeling that I was the reason for it. The whispers had returned, louder now, more urgent. They echoed off the walls, filling the chamber with a haunting, rhythmic chant that seemed to reverberate through my bones. The light from the carvings intensified, and the room began to shake. Then, in the blink of an eye, the altar cracked open. I stumbled back as the stone altar split in two, sending shards of rock flying in all directions. The blue light that had been pulsing from within it surged outward, filling the chamber with an intense, blinding glow. I shielded my eyes, but the light seemed to pierce through my very being, as though it was trying to pull me apart from the inside. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, like the growl of a sleeping beast being disturbed. The ground beneath me trembled, and I struggled to keep my balance as the temple itself seemed to come alive. The walls pulsed with energy, the carvings shifting and writhing as though they were trying to break free from the stone. And then I saw it, something emerging from the altar. It was massive, its form indistinct in the blinding light, but I could feel its presence, ancient and malevolent. It was the source of the whispers, the reason the city had been calling to me. And now it was awake. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. The thing from the altar loomed above me, its shadow stretching out across the chamber, and I could feel its gaze, cold and unyielding, boring into me. The whispers were deafening now, filling my head with a strange, incomprehensible language that I couldn't understand, but knew instinctively was a warning. I was in the presence of something far beyond my comprehension, something that should have remained buried beneath the waves. The entity that had emerged from the altar was unlike anything I had ever seen. It didn't have a form, not in the way I was used to. It was more like a shifting mass of shadows and light, constantly changing and morphing as it hovered above the shattered altar. Its presence was overwhelming, and the air around it seemed to hum with energy. The whispers had changed now. They weren't just a chorus of voices, they were one voice, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke directly to me, not in words but in feelings, impressions, images that flashed through my mind like memories that weren't my own. I saw the drowned city as it once was, a vibrant, thriving civilization, its people living in harmony with the sea. But something had gone wrong. The sea had turned against them, swallowing the city whole in a great wave of destruction. The images came faster now, a blur of chaos and terror, and I could feel the fear of the people as they tried to escape the rising tide. And then, I saw the entity. It was the sea itself, or at least something born from it, a being of immense power that had been worshipped by the people of the drowned city. But their reverence had turned to fear, and in their desperation to control the ocean, they had unleashed something they couldn't contain. The city had been destroyed as a result, and the entity had been sealed away, trapped beneath the waves. Until now. The images faded, and I was left standing in the chamber, the weight of the entity's presence pressing down on me. I could feel its power, its rage, but also its pain. It was a creature of the sea, bound to the ocean by forces I couldn't begin to understand. And now, after centuries of imprisonment, it was free once again. The whispers quieted, and the entity seemed to regard me with something like curiosity. I wasn't sure how I knew, but I could feel it probing my mind, searching for something. It wasn't malevolent, not exactly. It was more like it was trying to understand me, to make sense of the human standing before it. But the longer it lingered, the more I felt its influence creeping into my thoughts. It was like the sea itself was invading my mind, filling me with a strange, overpowering urge to return to the water. I could feel the pull of the ocean growing stronger, the weight of the waves pressing down on me, and I knew that if I didn't leave soon, I would be lost to it forever. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled the chamber. The temple seemed to shift and warp around me, the walls closing in as I raced down the twisting passageways. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stayed, I knew the ocean would claim me, just as it had claimed the city. I burst through the temple doors and into the ruins of the drowned city, my lungs burning as I struggled to breathe in the thick water. The shadows of the Silent Ones still lingered in the streets, their glowing eyes watching me as I stumbled through the city, but they didn't move to stop me. It was as though they were waiting, watching to see what I would do next. The entity's presence was still with me, a constant pressure in the back of my mind, urging me to return to the sea, to become one with the ocean. But I fought against it, pushing through the weight of the water as I made my way back toward the surface. The glow of the city began to fade as I swam higher, the shadows of the Silent Ones disappearing into the darkness. The whispers grew fainter, more distant, and I could feel the pull of the ocean weakening with every stroke. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I broke through the surface of the water, gasping for air as the cool night breeze washed over me. The island was just ahead, the flickering lights of my campsite a welcome sight in the darkness. I swam toward it, my muscles aching with exhaustion, but I didn't stop until I felt the sand beneath my feet once again. I collapsed on the shore, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The ocean was calm now, the waves lapping gently at the shore as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had been unleashed beneath the waves, something ancient and powerful, and I wasn't sure if I had truly escaped its grasp. The whispers were gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered, and I couldn't shake the sense that the ocean was still calling to me, waiting for me to return. For the next few days, I tried to move on, but the sense of unease lingered. I had escaped the drowned city, but I hadn't left it behind. The island was peaceful enough. Birds sang in the morning, the breeze blew through the trees, and the ocean stretched out, calm and serene. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that something was watching me from beneath the surface. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to the waves crashing against the shore, and I swore I could hear the faintest whispers. It wasn't as intense as before, just a soft murmur that seemed to rise and fall with the tide. But every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the pull of the ocean beckoning me back. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself with tasks around the camp. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the horrors I had witnessed in the drowned city were nothing more than the product of fear and isolation. But deep down I knew better. The sea had changed me. It had marked me in some way I couldn't quite understand. And then, one night, I heard it again. The voice. Clearer this time, louder. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was calling my name. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was coming from the ocean, echoing through the waves like a distant song. I got up and walked to the shore, the sand cool beneath my feet. The moon was high in the sky, casting a pale glow across the water. I stood at the water's edge, staring out at the horizon, and for the first time, I felt it, the presence of the entity. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was out there, in the ocean, waiting for me. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring out at the ocean as the voice echoed in my mind. It wasn't demanding, but it was persistent, a gentle call that pulled at something deep inside of me. The waves lapped against the shore, and with each one I felt the pull grow stronger. Part of me wanted to walk into the water, to let the ocean take me. I could feel the connection between myself and the entity growing, like an invisible thread linking us together. I had seen the city beneath the waves, witnessed the ancient power that had been trapped for so long, and now it wanted me to return. But I fought against it. I couldn't let the ocean claim me. I had escaped once, and I wasn't going to let it take me again. I backed away from the water, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice grew fainter, more distant, but it didn't disappear entirely. It was still there, just beneath the surface, waiting for me to give in. I turned and walked back to my camp, trying to push the thoughts of the ocean out of my mind. But the feeling of being watched followed me. Even as I lay back down in my tent, the sound of the waves seemed to echo in my head, and the voice lingered in the background, whispering my name. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning I was exhausted, my mind still clouded by the events of the night before. I had spent hours tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sun was already high in the sky by the time I finally dragged myself out of bed, and I felt like a shadow of my former self. As I stumbled through my morning routine, my thoughts kept drifting back to the drowned city and the entity I had awakened. I had tried to put it out of my mind, to convince myself that it was all just a bad dream, but the memory of the glowing eyes and the shifting shadows haunted me. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had been unleashed, and it wasn't going to go away on its own. I spent the day exploring the island, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for what was happening to me. I hiked through the dense forest, climbed rocky hills, and scoured the shoreline, but there was nothing. The island was as peaceful and unremarkable as ever, and for a brief moment I almost believed that I had imagined the whole thing. But then, as I made my way back to camp, I stumbled upon something I hadn't noticed before. A small, weathered statue half buried in the sand near the water's edge. It was made of stone, worn smooth by the ocean's currents, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a figure, humanoid but not quite human. Its face was elongated, its eyes wide and hollow, and its body was covered in scales. I knelt down to examine it, my heart racing. The statue was ancient, older than anything I had ever seen before, and yet it felt familiar, like I had seen it somewhere before. And then it hit me, the carvings in the temple, the same figures, the same eyes watching me from the walls. This statue was part of the drowned city. The island wasn't just a random piece of land, it was connected to the city beneath the waves. I spent the next few days searching the island, my mind racing with questions. If the island was connected to the drowned city, then that meant I was never truly safe. The ocean's grip on me had never loosened. I had been standing on the edge of the abyss this whole time, and I hadn't even realized it. As I explored, I found more signs, more statues, broken pieces of stone tablets, and strange carvings etched into the rocks. The further I went, the more I realized that the island had once been part of the city. It had been a sacred place, a place of worship, dedicated to the very entity I had awakened. I tried to piece together the history, to make sense of what had happened. The people of the drowned city had worshipped the sea, and in doing so, they had created something powerful, something that had eventually destroyed them. The island had been spared, left untouched by the destruction, but the connection to the ocean remained. And now the entity was awake, and it was calling to me. As the days passed, the pull of the ocean grew stronger. The whispers had returned, louder than ever, and I could feel the entity's presence more clearly now. It wasn't just calling me, it was demanding my return. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The ocean wouldn't let me leave. It had claimed me, just as it had claimed the city beneath the waves, and no matter how hard I fought, I couldn't escape its grasp. One night, as I lay in my tent, listening to the waves crashing against the shore, I made my decision. I couldn't run from this any longer. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to be free, I had to confront the entity. I had to go back to the drowned city. I packed my things and made my way to the water's edge, the moonlight casting an eerie glow across the ocean. The voice was louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel the pull of the water as I waded into the surf. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would survive, but I knew I couldn't fight the ocean any longer. As I dove beneath the waves, I felt the cool water envelop me, and the voice in my head grew quiet. The drowned city was waiting for me, and this time I wasn't afraid. The cold water enveloped me, pushing against my body as I descended into the depths. The pull of the ocean was relentless, dragging me deeper, as if the sea itself were guiding me back to the drowned city. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, and I could feel the pressure building around me, pushing me down into the darkness. I swam through the murky water, my movements slow and deliberate as I navigated the familiar path to the city. The glow from the ruins below grew stronger, casting an eerie light that illuminated the underwater landscape. The once familiar cityscape now appeared even more surreal, the buildings twisting and warping as if they were alive. I could see the temple ahead, its towering structure a beacon in the darkness. It was different now, cracked and broken, as though it had been torn apart and then hastily patched together. The blue light from the altar pulsed rhythmically, drawing me closer. As I approached, I could see the entity more clearly. It hovered above the shattered altar, its form shifting and changing as it floated in the water. It seemed to be waiting for me, its presence a mixture of anticipation and impatience. I reached the temple entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers had become a cacophony, overwhelming my senses as I stepped inside. The chamber was filled with a swirling blue mist, and the walls seemed to pulse with energy. The entity's presence was overwhelming. It filled the chamber with an intense, oppressive energy that made it difficult to breathe. The whispers had turned into a single, commanding voice, resonating through the water and into my mind. The voice spoke to me, not in words, but in feelings, impressions. It was demanding something from me, something that I couldn't quite understand. The more I tried to grasp the meaning, the more intense the pressure became. It was as if the entity was trying to force me to give in, to become one with it. I could see the altar clearly now, its surface glowing with an eerie blue light. The cracks in the stone seemed to shimmer and shift, revealing glimpses of an ancient dark power that had been sealed away for centuries. The entity seemed to be drawing power from the altar, feeding off the ancient energy that had been trapped within it. It was trying to re-establish its connection to the ocean, to the city it had once ruled over. I could feel the entity's influence growing stronger, its power pressing down on me, trying to control my thoughts and actions. It was as though it was reaching out to me, offering me a place by its side, promising power and immortality in exchange for my loyalty. But I wasn't ready to give in. I fought against the pressure, trying to maintain control over my own mind. I needed to find a way to escape, to break free from the entity's grasp before it was too late. I knew I couldn't stay in the chamber any longer. The entity's power was too overwhelming, and I could feel my own willpower waning under its influence. I had to find a way to escape, to get out of the temple and away from the entity before it was too late. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I looked around the chamber. The altar was the source of the entity's power, and if I could find a way to destroy it, I might be able to weaken the entity and give myself a chance to escape. I noticed that the altar was cracked in several places, and the blue light seemed to be emanating from these fissures. If I could exploit these cracks, I might be able to disrupt the energy flow and weaken the altar. I swam closer to the altar, my movements slow and deliberate as I examined the cracks. The blue light was blinding, making it difficult to see clearly, but I could make out a few weak points in the structure, places where the stone was particularly worn and brittle. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small metal tool that I had brought with me. It wasn't much, but it was sharp and strong. I began to pry at the cracks, working carefully to avoid drawing the entity's attention. As I worked, I could feel the entity's presence growing more agitated. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if it sensed that something was happening. The pressure on my mind increased, but I pushed through, focusing on the task at hand. The cracks in the altar deepened as I continued to pry at them. The blue light grew more erratic, flickering and pulsing as the energy flow became disrupted. I could feel the power of the entity weakening, its influence lessening as the altar's structure was compromised. I kept working, my hands trembling with exhaustion as I fought against the growing pressure. The whispers had turned into a deafening roar, a chaotic mix of voices that seemed to merge into one continuous, threatening sound. Finally, with one last effort, I managed to pry open a large fissure in the altar. The blue light burst forth in a blinding flash, and the chamber was filled with an intense, otherworldly glow. I could feel the energy of the entity collapsing, its power dissipating as the altar's structure gave way. The temple began to shake, the walls vibrating with the release of energy. I knew I had to leave quickly. I turned and swam toward the entrance, the pressure of the water and the entity's influence making it difficult to move. The chamber was collapsing behind me, the walls crumbling and falling apart as the altar's destruction caused a chain reaction. I pushed through the debris, fighting against the current as I made my way to the surface. The water around me was chaotic, filled with swirling debris and the remnants of the altar's destruction. I fought my way to the surface, gasping for air as I broke through the waves. The night was calm, the stars shining brightly overhead, but the sea felt different, lighter, as though the entity's presence had been lifted. I swam to the shore, my body exhausted but relieved. I collapsed on the sand, the cool breeze washing over me as I lay there, staring up at the sky. The whispers were gone, replaced by the peaceful sounds of the ocean. I had faced the ancient power of the drowned city and survived. The entity had been weakened, its influence diminished, and the city's ruins were now just a memory beneath the waves. But the experience had changed me. I knew I would never be the same. As I looked out at the ocean, I couldn't help but wonder if the entity would ever return. The sea was vast and mysterious, and there were always secrets lurking beneath its surface. But for now, I was safe. The drowned city was gone, and its ancient power was no longer a threat. I stood up and gathered my things, ready to leave the island and return to the world above. The ocean had tested me, and I had faced its darkness. Now, I was ready to move on, to leave the past behind and start a new chapter in my life. And as I walked away from the shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sea would always be a part of me, a reminder of the ancient power that had once called me back to its depths. As I left the island behind, the sun began to rise, casting a warm, golden light across the water. The tranquility of the morning was a stark contrast to the chaos I had just experienced. The drowned city was now a distant memory, its darkness and power relegated to the depths of the ocean. I boarded the small boat I had used to reach the island, feeling the weight of my experience pressing heavily on me. The island's peaceful appearance belied the horrors that lay beneath its surface. I had escaped, but the memories of what I had witnessed would stay with me forever. The journey back to the mainland was uneventful, but my mind was far from calm. I replayed the events over and over, trying to make sense of what had happened. The whispers, the entity, the ancient power. Everything seemed like a surreal dream, a nightmare that I had somehow lived through. By the time I reached the mainland, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. I docked the boat and made my way to a small cabin I had rented where I planned to recover and reflect. The isolation of the cabin was a welcome reprieve, a place where I could gather my thoughts and try to piece together the fragments of my experience. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself struggling to return to a sense of normalcy. I tried to bury the memories of the drowned city, to convince myself that it was all just a figment of my imagination, but the shadows of the past were not so easily erased. At night, I would often wake in a cold sweat, my heart racing as I relived the events of the underwater city. The whispers that had once filled my mind now seemed to echo in the silence of the cabin. I could still feel the pull of the ocean, the entity's presence lingering like a ghost in the back of my mind. I began to notice strange occurrences around the cabin, objects moving on their own, unexplained noises in the dead of night. I tried to rationalize them as the effects of stress and exhaustion, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ocean's grip on me had not completely loosened. The drowned city's influence seemed to have followed me, seeping into my life and distorting my reality. I knew I had to confront these lingering shadows if I ever hoped to find peace. One evening, while exploring the area around the cabin, I stumbled upon an old journal buried in the sand near the shore. It was weathered and worn, its pages yellowed with age. I carefully opened it, and to my surprise, I found detailed accounts of the drowned city and its ancient rituals. The journal belonged to an explorer who had ventured into the city many years before me. His entries described similar experiences, visions, whispers, and the overwhelming presence of the entity. The accounts mirrored my own, confirming that I was not alone in my ordeal. One entry stood out to me, a description of a ritual meant to seal away the entity's power permanently. The explorer had attempted it but had been unsuccessful, leaving the entity trapped and waiting for someone to release it. The ritual required specific artifacts, ones that I had seen in the drowned city but had not fully understood. This discovery gave me a glimmer of hope. If I could find these artifacts and complete the ritual, I might be able to banish the entity for good, but I knew it would be a dangerous undertaking, and I would need to prepare thoroughly. Determined to end the entity's influence once and for all, I began searching for the artifacts mentioned in the journal. The search took me to various locations, museums, ancient ruins, and historical archives. Each artifact was more elusive than the last, and my quest became a race against time. My investigation led me to old records of archaeological digs and forgotten lore. I learned that the artifacts were scattered across different parts of the world, each holding a piece of the ritual's power. It became clear that completing the ritual would require more than just finding the artifacts. It would require deciphering the ancient texts and performing the ritual correctly. With each piece of the puzzle I uncovered, I felt the weight of the drowned city's influence growing lighter. I was determined to finish what had been started, to put an end to the entity's terror once and for all. After months of searching and preparation, I finally gathered all the artifacts needed for the ritual. The time had come to return to the drowned city and complete the ritual that had been left unfinished. I knew it would be a perilous journey, but I was ready. I set out once again for the island, the memories of my previous visit still fresh in my mind. As I approached the island, I felt the familiar pull of the ocean, the whispers growing louder as if the entity knew I was returning. The descent into the city was just as harrowing as before. The ruins were still there, a haunting reminder of the power that had once been unleashed. I made my way back to the temple, the artifacts clutched tightly in my hands. The chamber was eerily quiet, the echoes of the entity's presence still lingering in the air. I began the ritual, carefully placing each artifact in its designated spot and reciting the ancient incantations from the journal. The energy in the chamber began to shift, the blue light from the altar pulsing rhythmically. As the ritual progressed, the entity's presence grew more agitated. The whispers turned into a roar, a chaotic mix of voices that seemed to be fighting against the ritual's power. I could feel the pressure building around me, but I pressed on, determined to see it through. Finally, with a surge of energy, the ritual reached its climax. The altar's blue light flared brightly and a wave of power surged through the chamber. The entity's presence began to dissipate, its influence weakening as the ritual took effect. The chamber fell silent as the entity's power was sealed away. The blue light from the altar faded, and the once overwhelming presence was gone. The drowned city was finally free from the entity's grip. I made my way back to the surface, exhausted but relieved. The ocean seemed calmer, the pull that had once drawn me to the city now a distant memory. As I reached the shore, I felt a sense of closure, a finality that had eluded me for so long. The journey had been arduous, but it had taught me the true nature of the entity and the power it held. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, and the drowned city was now just a shadow beneath the waves. As I prepared to leave the island for the last time, I took one last look at the ocean. The sea had tested me, but it had also given me a chance to confront my fears and find my own strength. And though the whispers were gone, I knew that the sea's secrets would always be a part of me. With a final glance at the horizon, I boarded the boat and set sail for the mainland, ready to begin a new chapter in my life. The drowned city was behind me, and the ocean's last whisper was a reminder of the journey I had taken. Returning to the mainland was like stepping into a new world. The familiar sights and sounds felt different, more vibrant. The ordeal in the drowned city seemed like a distant memory, but the lessons I had learned and the strength I had gained stayed with me. I was determined to leave the past behind and start afresh. I settled into a quiet coastal town, far from the chaos and shadows of my previous experiences. The ocean was always in view, a constant reminder of the journey I had undertaken. But now, it was a source of peace rather than dread. I took long walks along the beach, finding solace in the rhythmic crash of the waves and the gentle breeze. The town was welcoming, and I began to build a new life for myself. I found work at a local museum where I could share my experiences and knowledge without being overwhelmed by the shadows of the past. It was a fresh start, and I embraced it with open arms. Life seemed to be moving forward smoothly until one day I received a mysterious package at the museum. It was an old, weathered box with no return address. Inside, I found a collection of strange artifacts, pieces that resembled those I had encountered in the drowned city. The discovery unsettled me. How had these artifacts found their way to me? Were there others who sought the power of the drowned city? The question gnawed at me, and I felt an uneasy connection to my past experiences. The package seemed to suggest that the story was not entirely over. I decided to investigate, but the more I dug, the more I realized that these artifacts were part of a larger puzzle, one that seemed to be connected to the drowned city and its history. It was as if the past was reaching out to me, challenging me to confront it once again. The artifacts in the package began to have strange effects. I started experiencing vivid nightmares, filled with visions of the drowned city and the entity that had once haunted me. The whispers returned, though now they were fainter and more disjointed. The local museum where I worked became a center of mysterious occurrences. Objects would move on their own, and strange sounds echoed through the halls at night. The museum staff and visitors began to notice these anomalies, and I could sense that the artifacts were somehow linked to these disturbances. I consulted experts on ancient artifacts and rituals, hoping to understand the significance of the items I had received. It became clear that these artifacts were part of a larger ritual, one that had been broken and needed to be completed. Research revealed that the artifacts were remnants of an ancient ritual meant to control or appease the entity I had faced before. The incomplete ritual had left the entity's influence lingering, and the artifacts were pieces needed to finish it. The original ritual was supposed to have sealed the entity's power permanently, but it had been interrupted. To complete the ritual, I needed to find additional artifacts and perform the ceremony in the right location. I discovered that the remaining artifacts were scattered across different parts of the world, hidden in places with historical significance. Determined to resolve the unfinished ritual and prevent further disturbances, I set out on a quest to locate these artifacts. Each one would bring me closer to understanding the full extent of the ritual and ultimately put an end to the lingering threat. My journey took me to distant lands, each with its own rich history and mysteries. From ancient temples to forgotten ruins, I searched for clues and artifacts that would complete the ritual. Along the way, I encountered other researchers, historians, and local guides who provided valuable insights and assistance. In each location, I faced challenges, riddles to solve, dangers to avoid, and remnants of ancient traps that had been set to protect the artifacts. My experiences with the drowned city had prepared me for these trials, but they were no less daunting. The search was exhaustive, and my travels took me across continents. The artifacts I collected each held a piece of the puzzle, gradually revealing the full scope of the ritual and its intended purpose. Each discovery brought me closer to the resolution I sought. As I continued my quest, I realized I couldn't complete the ritual alone. I needed allies, people who could help me understand the artifacts and perform the ritual correctly. I reached out to experts in various fields, including historians, archaeologists, and occult scholars. These experts were intrigued by my findings and agreed to assist me in my mission. Together, we pooled our knowledge and resources to decipher the ancient texts and understand the significance of the artifacts. With their help, I felt more confident in my ability to complete the ritual. We prepared meticulously, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. The final stage of the ritual was complex, requiring precise timing and coordination. After months of preparation and gathering the necessary artifacts, we were ready to perform the ritual. The location we chose was crucial. It had to be a place of historical significance, where the power of the ritual could be harnessed effectively. We set up the artifacts in the designated arrangement, following the instructions from the ancient texts. The ritual required a combination of symbols, incantations, and specific actions to be performed in sequence. Each artifact played a role in channeling the energy and sealing the entity's influence. The atmosphere was charged with tension as we began the ritual. The energy in the air seemed to shift, and the artifacts glowed with an otherworldly light. We worked diligently, ensuring that every step was executed precisely. The ritual reached its climax as we completed the final incantations and positioned the last artifact. The energy surged, creating a powerful vortex of light and sound. Artifacts resonated with the ritual's energy, their combined power amplifying the effect. The chamber we had chosen became a focal point of intense energy. The air crackled with power, and the artifacts glowed brightly as the ritual took hold. The energy began to coalesce, forming a protective barrier that sealed the entity's influence once and for all. I could feel the presence of the entity dissipating, its power fading as the ritual took effect. The whispers grew fainter and eventually vanished, replaced by a profound sense of calm and relief. With the ritual completed, I felt a sense of profound accomplishment. The entity's influence was finally gone, and the lingering threat had been resolved. The artifacts were carefully stored and preserved, their purpose fulfilled. The team of experts and allies who had helped me were relieved and satisfied. We had worked together to address a significant historical and mystical challenge, and our efforts had paid off. I returned to my life with a renewed sense of purpose. The museum where I worked was no longer plagued by disturbances, and the artifacts were secured. The ocean, once a source of fear, was now a reminder of the journey I had undertaken and the strength I had found within myself. Looking back on the journey, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. The drowned city had been a test of courage and perseverance. The entity's power had been a formidable challenge, but I had faced it with determination and resourcefulness. The experiences had shaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had learned the value of trust and collaboration, the importance of facing one's fears, and the strength that comes from confronting the unknown. As I continued my work at the museum, I shared my experiences with others, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the power of human resilience and the pursuit of knowledge. The story of the drowned city became a part of my legacy, a reminder of the journey and the impact it had on my life. The ordeal with the drowned city had given me a new perspective on life. I had learned to appreciate the beauty of the world and the importance of cherishing each moment. The ocean, once a symbol of fear, was now a source of inspiration and tranquility. I took time to explore new interests and passions, finding joy in activities that brought me happiness. The experience had taught me to embrace life with open arms and to find fulfillment in the everyday moments. I also became involved in initiatives to preserve and protect historical sites and artifacts. My experiences had shown me the significance of these treasures and the need to safeguard them for future generations. One day, while attending a conference on ancient history, I encountered a researcher who was studying similar phenomena. They had come across references to the drowned city and its rituals in their own research. Our conversation revealed new insights and connections between our findings. It was a reminder that the search for knowledge is never truly over, and that there is always more to learn and discover. We decided to collaborate on future research projects, combining our expertise to delve deeper into the mysteries of ancient civilizations and their connections to the modern world. It was an exciting opportunity to continue exploring and uncovering new truths. As time went on, I felt a growing desire to share my knowledge and experiences with others. I began giving lectures and writing articles about the drowned city and its significance. My goal was to educate others about the importance of historical preservation and the lessons learned from my journey. The story of the drowned city became a source of inspiration for many. It was a reminder that even in the face of great challenges, there is always hope and the possibility of overcoming obstacles. I took pride in passing on the legacy of my experiences and contributing to the broader understanding of ancient mysteries. It was a way to ensure that the lessons learned and the experiences gained were not forgotten. As I looked out at the horizon, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment and peace. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had led me to a place of clarity and purpose. The drowned city was no longer a source of fear, but a symbol of resilience and growth. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and endless, a reminder of the boundless possibilities that life offers. The experiences and lessons from the drowned city had shaped me into who I was, and I embraced the future with hope and excitement. With a final glance at the sea, I knew that my journey was far from over. There would always be new adventures, new discoveries, and new horizons to explore. And as I embarked on this next chapter of my life, I carried with me the strength and wisdom gained from the depths of the drowned city.